In local matters, there are new questions concerning the federal investigation into Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz and if he violated federal sex trafficking laws. A former associate of the Florida Republican pleaded guilty to federal sex trafficking charges earlier this month. He agreed to cooperate with DOJ investigators as part of the plea deal. Congressman Gaetz has repeatedly denied all accusations made against him. Last week, CNN reported federal investigators had secured the cooperation of the congressman's ex-girlfriend and former Capitol Hill staffer. She is seen as a critical witness to the investigation. But Politico's Olivia Beavers and Marc Caputo say the report isn't true. One of their sources said, quote, "It's wrong at worst and premature at best." Marc Caputo joins me from Miami. He's a national political reporter at Politico. Hi, Marc. Thanks for joining us. So are federal investigators still working to secure Gaetz's ex-girlfriend's cooperation? And how critical is that cooperation?
That's our understanding. Just to be clear, we're not saying the CNN report isn't true. It's just the people that we know who have knowledge of it say it's not true. That having been said, she is in talks, or her lawyer is in talks, with the federal government prosecutors to see if she can get an immunity deal. She fears that she might have run afoul of an obstruction of justice charge because she was on the phone with the victim of the sex trafficking act that was committed by this former Seminole County, Florida tax collector named Joel Greenberg, from whom this entire case stems. I don't want to say that she's the victim of Matt Gaetz's sex trafficking because, again, as you pointed out, he has said he didn't do it. So far, no evidence has shown he's done it. We'll see what we see. Now, that having been said, right, what is the information that his ex-girlfriend, Matt Gaetz's ex-girlfriend, can supply? We don't really know, but it's obviously very important because these prosecutors want to put together an airtight case if they are going to be able to bring it. And in order to do that, they have some challenges. One of them is Joel Greenberg is a problematic witness. We're not sure about the victim of the sex trafficking that he pleaded guilty to. And this involves alleged acts that took place 5 years ago in drug-induced hazes. It's not very conducive for people having very good memory. So what the actual evidence trail looks like and what people can testify to it becomes very important, very crucial in these final days or in these months, perhaps, as prosecutors decide whether or not they can bring a charge or charges.
What about that victim, though, of the Matt Gaetz associate? Has she been asked to testify? Because she has allegedly been connected to Gaetz as well. Do you have any more information about what she might be able to provide to investigators?
We have one source who says she's 100% talking to investigators. Now, is she cooperating with them? Has she named names? That we've gotten, let's say, mixed signals on that. It does appear she's talking. They appear to have more information than just from Joel Greenberg. Prosecutors have talked to at least a dozen people in this case. If she testifies, if Joel Greenberg testifies, or agrees to bring evidence, and if Matt Gaetz's ex-girlfriend does, obviously it depends on what they say, but there's a really strong case there, or there's a really strong possibility that charges will be brought against Gaetz. The question is when. A lot of insiders that we talk to say, probably about July. Like if you don't see charges against Matt Gaetz by July, then it's going to be, in their opinion, less likely that he'll be charged. So these next few weeks, the next month, are going to be pretty crucial.
Right. So that's what I was going to ask you in terms of a time frame of when this investigation will conclude. Are you looking at months, not weeks? And if Congressman Gaetz, is indicted, how much damage control will need to be done, considering his base's waning trust in the Justice Department?
It's a good question about the Republican base. Matt Gaetz has been touring the nation with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and they've been going to events in Ohio, in Arizona, his home of Florida here. He's in Dalton, Georgia today with her home state. They're being met with crowds in the hundreds and not crowds in the thousands. It's an indication that there is a segment of the Republican base, to your point, they don't believe what they see in the mainstream news media, and they don't believe the Justice Department has good intentions. So as far as Matt Gaetz's base would be concerned, if he gets indicted, again, a big if, he's probably not going to take much of a hit from them. Now, there is going to be an increasing amount of pressure in Congress to strip him from his committee post, at least from the Judiciary Committee. So that would be one kind of proximate consequence that he would probably immediately face. This having been said, as I mentioned before, the prosecutors want a very airtight case. The Middle District of Florida, where this would be tried, is a pretty Trumpy district. So there might be a jury there that has a number of kind of politically like-minded people to Matt Gaetz, and there's a possibility prosecutors might consider that as well.
Right. So far, it seems, as you just mentioned, the base is not all too worried about this investigation, but political allies have distanced themselves from, Congressman Gaetz, such as Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, who is a potential competitor, right, down the road. Both of these men seem to be eyeing a presidential run in 2024. How might that divide Florida's political landscape and the Republican Party?
Yeah, I got to, if Matt Gaetz runs for president against Ron DeSantis, he basically helped run Ron DeSantis's campaign, and Matt Gaetz also was in charge of his transition when Ron DeSantis first became governor. That would certainly that would be quite a shock in the state. I would be surprised if both of them wound up running together against each other at the same time for president. But I've seen stranger things in the state as well.
Nonetheless, do you think he is isolating himself, though, among some former supporters within the party?
Well, I don't know about former supporters in the party, but Matt Gaetz has not made a lot of friends in the Republican caucus in the House, and those who are inclined to dislike him like him even less now. So his thing. Gaetz's thing is that he kind of wants to be disliked by these people. Part of his political identity that he forged once he got up into Washington was being this kind of iconoclastic rule breaker to a degree, someone who wasn't going to sit around and be bound to the seniority-based congressional system where everyone kind of backslaps and gets along and then kind of doesn't accomplish a whole hell of a lot. That's not to say he accomplished a whole hell of a lot doing what he's doing. He mainly became a kind of a MAGA figure on TV, on Fox. But he's now moved beyond that. Fox barely has him on. I think they have kind of a de facto blackout of having him on. But when you go to these events or you see video of these events, that's not hurting Matt Gaetz at all at the moment. But I should add, what would hurt him certainly would be an indictment and obviously a conviction if one happens.
Well, we'll see how it all works out for Matt Gaetz. Well, Marc Caputo, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thanks.